Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today as I talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and the impacts it can have on you and your family. This is a pretty intense topic as some of the others, if you've listened to any of my other workshops thus far. So I encourage you, if these are things that kind of do pop up for you, to make sure that you check out the resources at the end or reach out for additional supports. So our goal for today is going to be talking, of course, about first responders and the impact PTSD has on those in your positions, recognizing some of the signs and symptoms, looking at how it impacts your family members, and then just thinking about resiliency. How do we bounce back and recover, right? So volunteers, it's for yourselves, there's similar, but there's different components of how it impacts volunteers in first responding based roles. So I'll break that down a little bit, but one way or another, like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it can impact anybody despite what type of role or position that they're in. So these are just some of the key areas that we're going to develop and talk about over the course of the next hour here. So first thing I'm going to pick on is if you think about your job in general, just as a firefighter. Now, you might have another job full-time already that you're working and volunteering here, or you may be retired and still volunteering, or one way or another. But the most stressful jobs on Earth. So in the last 5 years, firefighting has been in the top handful of most stressful jobs, if not number one, number two, over the last 5 years for at least 4 or 5 of those years. Kind of flips back and forth often with military service, so those in the military. So again, deployment and dealing with a lot of traumatic events during deployment. But you can see a lot of those similarities. And I deal with military, I deal with police, I deal with firefighters, EMS, paramedics. Like there's tons of different roles, and there's a lot of overlap in these. But the key is the trauma. It's there and how it impacts us. And that's what we want to recognize. So you are already in a position where you are more likely going to have a very stressful job than many other individuals. So just knowing that means we got to make sure to take more care of ourselves. We've got to put that self-care up front, which is something I'll pick on in the resiliency section of today's workshop. So for yourselves as volunteer kind of firefighters, this is where some of the unique stresses and challenges that you're going to deal with is because you already have full-time jobs. So if you're not retired, but if you do have a full-time job, now you have an additional job, essentially the second to that full-time job. It's almost called the second shift to an extent, or the third shift if you're also a caregiver at home as well, right? So it can consume a ton of your spare time, which doesn't often lead to a lot of time for self-care. In fact, it can take away from a lot of the things that you use for self-care: friends, family, resources, exercise, interests, hobbies, the things that you use to have fun for, right? And you may even plan some of these things. But again, the challenge of being in this role is that you're essentially almost on call 24/7, depending on what the position is that you're holding. So being on call, it could be your kid's birthday, it could be Christmas morning and dinner, it could be anniversary, date night, or whatever it is. Then all of a sudden, you get to call and you got to head out of town, right? You got to head out to those environments. And this is where it can be difficult. And as I pick again, as I come back to the resilience, this is why adaptability to me is so important, because we got to be flexible. We got to be fluid with those types of positions. I used to do a ton of on-call stuff myself, completely different than yourselves and kind of leading. But my on-call was like suicidal distress centers, things like this, 24/7. So middle of the night, 2 in the morning, get a phone call. It doesn't matter what's going on. I could have soccer matches, birthday games, whatever it is. But if there's a crisis call, then I was required to essentially address those scenarios. So it didn't take me away, likely as long as your scenarios would take you away, but it's just finding those ways to adapt to those events, right? And for yourselves, because it's not just a one-off. It's not to just have one event. It's the repetition of traumatic events that can culminate and build up that leads more to that PTSD likely experience. And then sometimes, depending again on where you're working and where you're volunteering, you may even be responding to calls that are a little bit more local in that community, which increases the risk of you knowing someone in that environment, which can also create a more intense impact versus being on call to the city or a certain environment that's just not necessary your stomping grounds, right? So there's some unique challenges, one way or another, being volunteer or full-time firefighter. It's still stressful, and it's how we cope and navigate it that is so important. And this is why PTSD is so high in individuals with the military, with police, with firefighters, with any first responder based roles, simply because it's exposure to traumatic events, right? And the exposure doesn't mean that it has to happen to you. You don't have to be the one that was hurt, injured, or harmed. You just have to witness it. And by witnessing it, it can have a major impact on how you start to perceive things moving forward. So post-traumatic stress disorder is the result of the negative consequence of you either personally experiencing or more likely in your role, witnessing ongoing traumatic events. And that may not be something that presents immediately. Those events can culminate and create traumas years down the road. So when I deal with individuals, it could be an event that happened 2 years ago. But because of all these other variables that took place, that one might have been the first one that all the trauma kind of began. Everything else just built up, built up, built up until we kind of broke. But it was that primary trauma that started everything off, right? So this is why we want to be aware of, like, are we taking care of ourselves? What are we doing? And certain people are at higher risk of this, especially those who have had mental health difficulties in the past, stress, depressions, kind of anxieties, trauma, abuse in their youth. Any of those challenges are going to increase my risk for PTSD. Ongoing exposure, repeated events, which is essentially what your job is repeated exposure to traumatic events with the lack of coping skills that can come into it. So if I'm not the most resilient person, then my likelihood of experiencing PTSD is going to go up exponentially. Okay. When you look at rates of PTSD in the firefighting kind of industry itself, now it depends on if you're doing actual diagnostics and assessments, or if you're kind of doing online simple self-reports. So doing a little checklist online, which to me is not the most accurate, you can see results up to 20 to kind of 40% of individuals. Now, to me, that simply just reflects how much trauma goes into individuals based on the work that you do. But when we look at actual diagnostics, to me, it's closer to around 10%. So around 10% of individuals in the industry are going to be likely to actually meet the clinical diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, the way you can look at this is essentially severity. The clinical PTSD is going to be more severe than the checklist, but I don't want you to write off the checklist. If the checklist is indicating that there are difficulties and challenges, then that 20 to 40% to me is still significant. It's still impacting the person, or else it wouldn't be flagging anything. It's still something that I would want people to address. It might be just more mild than it would if it was more of a clinical variable. But that means hopefully if I can get ahead of it, I can prevent it from becoming severe as well, right? So peace officers, a little bit kind of similar, but 7.6% with PTSD, 7% kind of a partial, more again along those, the checklist, that's 18 to 40%. For firefighters, you can see it's much greater than those even in the police force, right? So this, it just shows the jobs that you guys do, it can be a lot more stressful than you may actually think about, because you just think you're exposed to it all the time and you almost normalize it, which is why we got to pay attention to those areas, right? Some of the things just to kind of be aware of for yourselves that can contribute to the increased factors or the increased risk of PTSD. So of course, I already mentioned previous history with mental illness, starting at a young age. So the younger you are, like, not that I want to go into too much detail into this, but we're actually fully mentally mature, typically in our late 20s to early 30s. So if you went into firefighting when you were 18 years old after high school, early 20s, you're still developing, which means to me resiliency, maturity, all those things aren't there. I've never met an 18 or 20-year-old or 25-year-old, and I've never had a client where I've asked them, when you think back to when you were 18 or 20 years old, do you think you were mature? And someone said, oh yeah, I had my life sorted and figured out, right? So when we start at a younger age, it's actually more difficult because we don't necessarily have all those coping skills and the knowledge and the life experience, the full development of our brain capacity to be able to deal with some of these challenging events. Not to mention, the younger you start, the greater exposure you actually have to more trauma because you've been in the role for a longer period of time. So that's a big contributing factor to PTSD. Not being married, basically it's because the lack of support. Coming home to someone every night, having someone you get to talk to, debrief, reach out to, and get a hug from, like all of those things gives us meaning, gives us connection. Having children, like all of these things, realizing this is why I'm doing it, to protect others or to make others' lives better, right? So that's a protective factor for people. Leadership, of course, is difficult no matter what, because it's just an added stress. And of course, not everything goes well in your jobs because things tend to go sideways in those positions. So as a leader, we can often take that personal and think we should have done more or we should have led better when things didn't go well. How close I am to the death, so the proximity to that death is going to have an impact. Of course, the closer I am, the greater the impact. the more challenges I have, so the more traumatic it is, the greater the risk, the more stresses I have at that same time frame. So if I'm also dealing with challenges in my work life, family life, social life, personal life, all of these events are goals, and not just traumatic ones. This one says other traumatic events. It's just added stressful events. The more stress we have in our life, the greater the chance that a traumatic event can result in PTSD, right? And then negative self-talk, kind of not believing I have control over what's going on in life, and then just this hostile attributional error, which is I tend to have this negative outlook in life, and I project negativity to others, right? So these are all negative things that can increase my risk, and not just for PTSD, but any mental illness for that factor as well, right? Some of the things, and just I don't want to belabor this slide too much because you can kind of read this on your own and kind of go through it to kind of see where you're at. So I'll just read through it pretty quickly. But PTSD, some of the symptoms emotionally versus the work impairment, the consequences that can happen in that workplace. But this isn't just workplace, social life, family life, any area of life could have those same impairments. So emotionally, of course, I'm going to be more anxious. Like post-traumatic stress disorder, it is an anxiety-based disorder. So I'm going to have a lot more fear, a lot more hypersensitivity and arousal to different events. Irritability, sadness, breaking down, tears, things like this can be part of that emotional, which can result in isolation, avoidance, conflict, arguments, difficulty with families because of that negative emotional state. When I'm in a negative emotional state, that doesn't tend to make other people happy, content, and want to interact with me. Situationally, I can have more flashbacks, more nightmares, can be pop-ups and reminders based on sight, sense, sound, smell, like any number of things can create reminders to those events based on different situations that are aware, which can make me avoid, run away, want to escape, numb, and cope with use of substances, right? Or sometimes just unexpected. I didn't even think that was a problem until a situation presented, and then I have this unexpected reaction. Mentally, of course, thinking, focus, concentration, decision making will all be impaired because of those symptoms, which of course translates into work, friend, family, social life, where more errors, more issues, inability to be as productive or efficient as I could be, right? Physically, less energy, sleep problems, potentially due to nightmares. I might be taking medications and other things for pain management or for fatigue or energy or to get me going, which can result in missing work, avoiding activities with friends or family, not having the energy to want to get up or go out or do anything, right? And then, of course, values and beliefs. So this is where I start to lose trust or faith or beliefs. I start to have this negative mindset about myself. I beat myself up. I'm not strong. I'm weak. I should be strong. I'm supposed to be a hero, but I'm struggling. What's wrong with me, right? Which can again result in other confidence issues, kind of errors with kind of just your performance, avoidance and withdrawal again, but also challenging other individuals, what they're doing, their beliefs, and kind of how things play out. So tons of different signs and symptoms that come up. You can kind of check and look, do these things present in your life? And if they do, again, using some of the things that I'll talk about, but I do encourage you, like not just listening to this, but do reach out to somebody to talk to get additional support. So occupationally, I kind of just talked about this a little bit in the other slide already, but memory, focus, concentration, ability to complete tasks in a timely manner, right? So decision making is impeding. So lower energy, not being able to do things. Substance use, so coming to work if I'm under the influence, so not intoxicated, using drugs, creating energy, coping with whatever it is, marijuana, because I needed to sleep or X, Y, or Z, but then coming to work when I'm on call, even though I'm under the influence, right? Being angry, snapping at people, and then just lack of ability, period, to cope with the stresses that are going on. So when you're looking at a bunch of these areas, the more, of course, that are present, the more I want you to reach out and to do something about it. So when you have firefighters, new or old firefighters, but early parts of the career, in the end, there's that increased risk for mood and alcohol disorders simply because, like I've mentioned before, the less coping skills for it. The more we tend to get into it, either we develop healthy coping skills or we're actually more likely to exacerbate the mood and the alcohol-based issues because they don't find a healthy outlet to deal with the ongoing trauma that I'm exposed to daily, weekly, whatever it may be, right? So when you look at firefighters itself, PTSD and depression, I said a little bit before, so PTSD I threw around kind of that 8%, depression around 4%, so a little bit lower, but there's often overlap in the two, of course, right? So sometimes you're going to see kind of individuals that are depressed as well as have the trauma. And then another workshop that we talked about in substance use, that a lot of individuals tend to binge drink or go out as a way to numb or cope with the feeling. So on average, individuals will drink 42 alcoholic drinks or more kind of per week, have 4% consumption, right? So just thinking about 4% of the people, consume 42 plus drinks per week when what's the Canadian standards of healthy limits is 15, right? So up to 3 drinks per sitting for a male, up to 2 drinks per sitting for a female, up to 10 drinks or so for a female, up to 15 drinks or so for a male per week. So this is a triple, if not quadruple, depending on gender, how much it impacts you, right? Retired firefighters, so this is where the statistics don't necessarily improve. In fact, they can actually go up because of, again, longer exposure, depending on when we retire, why we retire, and what's going on. If I'm retiring simply because I have just burnt out in that environment, that's why depressions, anxieties, PTSD, and drinking can all go up based on what it is when you're actively engaged in that environment, right? So just because when you're done the job doesn't mean that everything is good. In fact, it can make things worse because we start to brood, dwell, ruminate, reflect on everything that happened, and that can end up creating a lot of these challenges for us as well. Another major concern, of course, is so if you look at the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, they have an estimate of over 3 times more suicide deaths than a line of duty death. So people are 3 times more likely to take their own life than they are to die on the job. To me, again, very much correlated to the fact that of the common exposure to trauma that you have often in that work environment, right? 25% of firefighters considered suicide, 12% have made plans. Now, it doesn't mean that they all act on it, of course. In fact, most people may have had passing thoughts in their life, but it's again greater in your world just because of that constant trauma. Now, sadly, what's also found is that because exposure to it actually is positively correlated with increased suicidal behavior. So it's the old, when we see it, we replicate it. When we see it, we replicate it. So when you see a celebrity essentially commit suicide, sadly, you actually see a ton of youth and teens that emulate that individual because if they looked up to them, like, oh, there's a solution, there's an out, that's how I can do it as well. So sadly, it provides a solution in a negative sense to others in a similar position. So they kind of follow that same path, right? So there's that positive correlation that if one does it, there's a great chance that others in that environment are going to consider it or act on it themselves as well. So this is where suicide is huge in that world that we want to be aware of it. And this is where there are resources, right? One of the things as a colleague that you can use if you're familiar with the Oscar check tool. So again, the Firefighters Foundation has created a check tool to assist other individuals. So I'll kind of read through this here for you, but I don't want you to go through some of these statements verbatim if you are supporting someone. I want you to create your own narrative to make it like how you would communicate with someone, so it doesn't come across as forced or kind of disingenuous, right? So the first thing is observation. We are going to observe with the other person. So I'm going to notice essentially what it is that I see. So, hey, how you doing, right? So simple follow-up, check-in. How is this individual doing? So if it was after a line of duty death or anything else, a traumatic event that occurred, doesn't have to be a line of duty death, any traumatic event or any oddities that you would see in somebody else's behavior, I would encourage you to use that same skill set. So first off, starts with, hey, just how you doing, right? And often the response is, as many do, I'm good, I'm fine, everything's great, right? So this is where what you're going to follow up with is the S is stating your observation. So we're picking on behaviorally specific examples of essentially what we notice. So I'm asking because I've noticed that you've been a lot more isolated, alone, you seem more disheveled, you haven't been wearing the same kind of things, you haven't done your hair in the last little bit, I see bags under your eyes, like whatever it is, you state your observation. What is it that you actually notice? Not projecting, not assuming, not jumping to conclusions. You look depressed, like I want tangible so that they can't contest it. If I say you look depressed, they say, I'm not depressed, I'm fine, leave me alone, right? But if I say, I've noticed that, and then you fill in, there's bags under your eyes, you've been more isolated than you used to be, or you're avoiding kind of coming out and chatting with the guys after shifts or whatever it is, that's tangible and it's obvious for them to be able to recognize, and it's harder for them to discount. So once you identify what it is behaviorally that's different, you let them know why you're bringing it up, right? So just clarify what's going on. So I'm bringing this up because, and hopefully it's genuine concern. Like I'm worried, I'm concerned about you. I want to know, can I help? Is there anything I can do? Like, what's going on, right? So by following up and just asking, like, am I right? Is there something going on? Now, sometimes they will agree, sometimes they will not, and you can't force them. I'll talk about that a little bit later in this workshop, but you cannot force someone to talk, but you can bring it up after you give them some time to reflect upon it again, because maybe that first part, moment you talk to them, you catch them off guard, but you try it again a couple of days later. If it's still present, you can say, hey, you know what? I'm still noticing kind of the stuff. I know it's not typically you. So you kind of go through those same steps again, like what's going on. So if they finally are okay with opening up, this is when you would respond with resources and tools. Essentially, I'm sorry, genuine. So the last statement in particular, make sure it's yours and not a verbatim thing. So not I've been through something similar, even though nothing to make the situation different. It helped me to talk about it because maybe you have, or maybe you haven't been in a similar situation. Like you need to make your own statement. But what you're going to do is you're going to reassure that you understand what they're saying, where they're coming from, what they're going through, whatever it is. You can acknowledge what's happening, and then you can refer to resources. So EFAPs, counselors, programs, different things that you may be aware of, but even just simply, what can I do? How can I assist? How can I help? Right. So in the grief workshop that I ran, to me, it's extremely important. Same thing. Like instead of telling people how to grieve, but you check in with them and you find out what can I do? How can I help? How can I assist? Because they are the best resource to kind of give you that feedback and guidance. So many individuals, they may shut it down, of course, simply because, again, the fear of stigma. So this is why I don't want to talk about it, because you're going to think I'm weak. You're going to think I'm not strong enough. You're going to think I'm incapable, not competent, whatever it is. So I just say everything is great. Everything is good, right? So this is often where for yourself, if you're one of those individuals, just realize like asking for help, it's greater for you, your friend, your family, your social, your work. Like everything improves when we get the help we can. When you try to do it on your own and you burn out, you're no good to anybody, right? We don't realize the actual impact it has on us, which is sometimes like it's kind of like weight gain. Like you don't realize you gained weight until you can't do your pants up anymore. So you don't realize until it's a lot greater. So when someone else brings it up, hey, it looks like you've kind of gained a little weight, it may not be a comfortable conversation, but I'd rather them bring it up with me when I've gained 5 pounds than when I gain 20 pounds so I can get back on track, right? And the hope is you have a supportive environment. And if we don't, then just you got to check that environment. But often we expect people to not care, to use the stereotypical just get over it or move on or put it behind you statements. And that's not the people we want to reach out to. So if that's the environment, we want to make sure we do create this supportive environment. But don't expect that's going to be the case from everyone, that everyone will be unsupportive, because that isn't the case. And the vast majority of the time that I have people that do reach out, it is. It's met with open arms, and it says, you know what, let me help you to the best of my ability. In relationships, so PTSD, of course, doesn't just impact you on a personal level, it'll also have an impact on your spouses, on people that you are involved with, right? So individuals in the firefighting based world with PTSD, there's greater levels of divorce, greater distance, kind of mental, physical, emotional, sexual, kind of all of these things. There's just a lack of connection between couples. There's often a numbing in those relationships because they just don't feel like I can do the things that I used to do because of, again, the anxiety, the symptoms, the stress, the depressions, the numbing, the substance, just like all the things that can kind of go together with the traumas that you guys are exposed to often, right? And then not only is the relationship impacted, but your partner's health is also impacted. So because you're stressed, the connection that you had likely before, which would have been strong, results in a distance, which can actually result in stress in your partner, not to mention your role, which is traumatic, which leaves them at home always worried about you, which also results in them worrying about you emotionally because of what you're constantly exposed to when you come home if there's distance, results in greater stress responses and heart diseases in your partner as well, right? So it's not just you that will have the negative impacts, but those in your environments can also be negative impacted, especially spouses, right? Common things that tend to happen in relationships. So the first, of course, is avoidance. We stop connecting. I don't want to do things with my partner. We don't go to movies. We don't have date nights. We don't go for dinner. We don't interact with one another. Now, this is even more difficult because if you have a full-time job and you're volunteering, you already have less time. So anytime that you do have, you actually avoid that person, creates a bigger disconnect with that person as well, right? And then, of course, emotional numbing. So emotional numbing is when we end up looking like we just all the things we're exposed to within the work environment, it just has such a great impact, a burden in our own life, that we feel like the best way to deal with it is to stop caring. So you can't compartmentalize that though. So you stop caring at work doesn't mean that you still love and care for everybody else. Once you stop caring in one place, that tends to infect other areas of your life. So we stop caring as much for our partner. We're more emotionally detached. We just feel numb, which means that, again, that's why there's less intimacy, less connection, less response, mental, physical, emotional. All of those gaps widen simply because I just shut down emotionally. I'm just overwhelmed and I don't want to deal with it anymore. I just numb myself to everything. I got nothing left to give back, right? So those are the two most common things. And both of them, of course, major negative impacts in relationships. So a couple things that we want to recognize with our partners as well, they tend to be less happy, less satisfied in their lives. There's more childcare often because you're out, which puts more burden on themselves. There's more anxiety and more depression. Just so they have greater kind of levels of anxiety and depression than average individuals as well, simply because of that exposure and the lack of connection within those relationships. So as much as you're mentally, physically exposed to the traumas, they have this almost the vicarious trauma, kind of like we talked about in one of the previous workshops, where, or secondary traumas where they are exposed to you. I used the example for myself in the past where my dad ended up losing his mom. I wasn't worried about the loss of his mom because I had never met my grandmother because he had immigrated to Canada when he was young and she passed away when I was a kid, so I never met her. But I was worried about my dad when he lost his mom, right? So this is where it's that secondary impact. Even though it had nothing to do directly with me, there's still an impact on me. So even though your partner's not exposed to the trauma, they're exposed to you who's exposed to the trauma, which can have a negative impact for them as well, right? So this is why we've got to make sure that we do take care of ourselves, or else, again, those impacts, it doesn't just impact me, but it impacts that entire family. The relationship falls apart. But sadly, the kids also struggle with this. So I'm not as engaged in my parenting, or more snappy, I'm more angry, I'm more aggressive, more violent, potentially. I yell and scream at the kids more because I don't have the same fuse, the same tolerance, the same patience that I would have had because I'm already, again, emotionally burnt out from everything else I've dealt with. So domestic violence can go up in these households. Diminished parenting styles can come up. The caregiver burden, like we said, the intimacy problems of divorce, things that I already kind of commented on in previous slides. But it's not a minor thing. It's not just these effects, it's just the one area. It can absolutely snowball and start to consume your life, which consumes the life of your spouses and your kids or the friends and other individuals, starts to impact the full-time jobs, your work, your focus, your engagement, and everything else, right? So that's why we really got to make sure we do take care of ourselves. And here's a couple of things to kind of pick on that you can engage in, hopefully, to really find that way to create the balance in life, right? So the most important thing to me, it's the old argument of quality over quantity, right? It's not about how much time, it's about what you do with the time. And right now, when you have limited time, because maybe you're working a ton and then getting called out, you want to make sure it's quality time. So when you're dealing with your kids, you have the undivided attention. You play, you walk, you read, things like this. So I have two kids myself. My kids, and again, different example, but my kids, one is 4 and one is 10 months old. My 4-year-old doesn't really get TV. So when people talk about all these TV shows, movies, programs, everything like that, I'm like, yeah, he doesn't know what those things are. So when people are talking about whatever Peppa Pig or the Wiggles or things like this, like he's seen none of it, right? So he's seen a couple of things, but he doesn't get TV daily. In fact, he doesn't even get it weekly. It might be monthly, depending on what's going on. And people often ask, so what do you do with your kids? Like, how do you get things done? And to me, it's like, well, the first thing I do with my kids is I play with them, I interact with them, I read books with them, I play games, we go for walks, we go to the park, like we do things together, right? It's quality time. So quantity time to me would just be, hey, you know what? I have just as much time with my kid, but my kid sits in front of the TV while I'm sitting in front of my computer doing something else. That to me is useless. So you want to create undivided attention and that quality time. And it doesn't have to be hours and hours and hours every day, but undivided attention to that kid is better than nothing, right? Versus the divided attention where you're trying to watch a ball game and the kid's trying to show you some artwork or tell you about their school or their day. And you're like, yeah, sounds good, but you're not even paying attention, right? So give the kids attention. In fact, give your spouse attention as well. Same thing, undivided attention to your spouse. Reach out for help, friends, family, support. Don't feel like you have to do it on your own. So if you have caregivers, you have grandparents, you have nieces, or sorry, can't have brothers or sisters, like get support. Use it. Don't try take on everything. Like you have to know your limits, right? The more you know your limits, the easier it is for you, again, to stay above grade so that you're not kind of burning yourself out. When you're home, make sure that you do. And I talked in one of the other workshops about kind of that balance between work and home life. So think when you come home, we got to turn that work off. How am I going to engage? Be present with the kids, savor those moments, have a good time, like connect with that family. So stay away from the work front, get involved in the family. And the family, I want to be present in those moments, right? A big thing to me. So this talks, the next slide here is that kind of traditions. So restoring family traditions prior to the PTSD. Now, PTSD or not, I want you to have traditions, things that you do. But to me, the key thing here is flexibility, right? Pandemic is a simple example to me. So with the pandemic, or even yourselves in your role, if you're called away, the pandemic, Christmas was essentially canceled and Thanksgiving was canceled. And then you had all these other events and whatever it is, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, like all these things that we couldn't go out, go to restaurants, go do things, enjoy yourself for it. But to me, the key thing, the day doesn't matter to me. So if my birthday is August 18th, well, I don't care if it's August 18th or September 1st. What matters to me is when can I get together with my friends and my family? So my birthday's on the 18th, but people can't get together to September 1st, and that's what we do. My brother lives in Vancouver. So Christmas for us, even though Christmas is December 25th, Christmas might be, he works in the retail industry. Christmas might be in January when he finally has a break when we can get the family together, and that's when we'll do it, right? This is where flexibility comes in. But when you think in black and white, no, it must be this day. And that's what you can teach the kids as well, that flexibility. Today's their birthday, it's planned, you got called out. So it's like, you know what? Don't worry, we're going to make this up. We're going to do it on another day. Don't definitively commit to another day because, again, you still don't know what's going to happen, but you make sure that you stick to your word and you do make it up. You do have that party, you do have the gathering, you do take them to that movie, you do whatever it is you said you're going to do, and you help them understand the nature of that work that you can get called away. But the good thing is, the goal is that you and me, one-on-one time, undivided attention, get this movie, go for this walk, play this game, X, Y, or Z. That's what we're still going to do. Like just because I got called away doesn't mean we're not going to do it. It's just we're not going to do it in this moment because, again, nature of the duty, helping, supporting, guiding, assisting other individuals, right? As parents, making sure you work together, keep that home environment strong, right? Helping people understand what's going on, but making sure that environment is calm. It's not angry. It's not you're burnt out or they're burnt out because they have that caregiver burden because you're away, so that everyone's just snapping at one another, right? Because modeling is so important, like how you navigate through those challenges. This is what you're reflecting to the kids. How do you resolve problems? How do you navigate through stress? What do you do when things are kind of going sideways? How do you generate flexibility? Because this is what you want your kids to be able to emulate, right? Because that's what gives them that future positive outlook that, yeah, you know what, no matter what goes on, no matter what challenges present, we'll still find a way forward. And that to me, it's the number of times I've had back gatherings with friends or family or anything that's come up and we have to cancel. Someone got sick, something happened, and we'll just again do it another day. Because to me, it's not the day, it's the meaning and the purpose of what you're doing, which is typically to celebrate with the friends and the family. And I don't care if that's a Monday or a Tuesday or a Saturday that you do it, it's based on when can I do it with the people that are important to me. So resilience is, of course, the desire for everybody. Resilience is that ability to bounce back, to recover in troubling, turbulent, difficult times. Now, some people are just naturally resilient. They just bounce back in adversity despite what it is. Other people, they actually have to work at it. So again, this is what you want to recognize for yourself. Do you have to work at it? Do you have to commit to it? Because if you do, it's on you to make sure that you engage in those skills, those tools in order to improve your life. Whereas if you were just hoping to bounce back and that there's going to be less trauma, less stress, less challenges that present, that's not going to be the desired outcome because you're just going to have another call, another trauma, another event that presents. Okay. So thinking about resiliency, just a couple things. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail here with you, but some things that you can pick on, of course, problem solving skills, being resourceful. This is where flexibility, ingenuity, adaptability comes in. Like to me, that is my main synonym for resiliency. How do you creatively adapt to the challenges that are being presented to your life? A quote that's on my backdrop, on my desktop, my screen, it's the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Basically, meaning there's always going to be obstacles in life, but instead of playing victim and throwing your hands up in the air and giving up, you generate strategies, goals, targets. So, one of the notes here is you are a survivor rather than a victim, right? If I'm a victim, then it's oh, poor me. When I'm a survivor, it's I have taken control of my life and there's hope and optimism to move forward. So common things in resiliency, friends and family. Like we commonly want to avoid, isolate, and withdrawal from people when we are overwhelmed. But one of the best things we can do is really be around people. That to me is the major issue with pandemic is that we've all been avoiding and isolating, which is why you see increased rates of stress, depression, addictions, anxiety. All of these things have gone up because we have less contact with humanity, right? And it doesn't mean you have to have in-depth conversations. Just simply getting a hug from someone in your social network can help us to feel significantly better. It can ease away the pain without changing anything. And this is where for yourselves and family with friends, get that physical contact, take those hugs, use those individuals again as that support network because it is so important, right? So engage with those people in healthy ways. So don't just go out with people for drinks or substance use. Again, that's not healthy, but engage with people in healthy manners. Find meaning, right? So what are you doing? Look at what's in your control, focusing on yourself. How are you bouncing back? How are you engaging what's happening? Looking at how you can, even though there was trauma, how did you reduce the negative impact of it? So I've talked in previous workshops that again, like the goal is to win or it's to succeed or it's to be the hero, the savior. But how you define that doesn't mean, so if we look at the fires that are currently going on, obviously we're not preventing the fires, but it's how can I reduce the trauma and the negative impact that those fires can create in the environment that's going on around us, right? So this is what we want to look at. Like the positive meaning is that, hey, you know what? Instead of everyone getting hurt and harmed, we reduced that significantly. And if we only focus on that, that's still burnt, everything that still happened that was negative, that's what consumes us. We have to find the positive meaning in the work that we do and what we're doing to keep us motivated in those areas, right? Managing your feelings, changing your mindset, again, asking for help when needed, and talking, if desired, to loved ones. Like you don't have to open up about everything. Make sure you open up enough that it's not just going to be the one-off event where, hey, you know what? I say something and then I bottle it all up again afterwards. I want to make sure that I'm letting these things out one way or another. And then, of course, spirituality, which can be different for every single person, whether that's in prayer, in religion, in meditation, relaxation, breathing, nature. Like it doesn't matter. There's tons of different ways. But find those ways for you to be resilient. Right? When you're dealing with this, a lot of individuals, so if we were to look at PTSD and treatment itself, so if you take 100 individuals with PTSD, over 3 months, 10 of them will improve just of their own volition, right? Just based on general events, circumstance, 10 of those 100 will improve without any support, treatment, or anything. Now, that does depend a little bit on the severity, the complexity of those traumas. So it might be a little bit more of the minor ones. But when you actually reach out for help, when you go talk to counselors, support groups, networks, things like this, where you learn tools, skills, knowledge, or ways to deal with the challenges that are going on, changing the thinking, the patterns, the responses to the events that have happened previously, that rate in 3 months actually jumps up from 10 to approximately 50, right? So significantly more people improve. And that doesn't mean that 50% of people of the 100 are not going to improve. This is just in that 3 month time frame. Some of it, of course, is going to be more severe. The greater longevity, the greater the impact, the more the history is, the more complex, because there could be other issues with substance use, depressions, other anxiety-based disorders, other family dynamics and traumas that are going on as well. So that could just extend. So 3 months, though, 50% of people, we can find a great amount of growth and improvement. But if we don't do anything, only 10% of people move forward, right? And that to me is not a great statistic, which again just reinforces how valuable it is to talk to people, to reach out, to let others know that, hey, you know what? there is help, there is support, either for me or for your colleagues, so that everybody knows we can do something about this. And the main reason why people do not do it again is stigma, right? It's the hero mindset. I need to do this by myself, which is not the case. So you want to be able to create that information, create the open book, create the dialogue, talk to people about it, saying, you know what, this is not something you have to do by yourself. And just creating that open door policy where it is something that people are aware of, it makes it easier for us to kind of open up to others in that environment as well. You see tons of programs out there right now on mental health awareness weeks just to get people talking about mental health, which is getting people to reach out more. And that to me is kind of what we want to do to support others, is let them know that it's okay to bring it up, right? So be patient, educate, understand what's going on, what's happening. And that education, to make sure, again, it's credible sources that you're using for education. You're not going on to Wikipedia and just reading random things that may not actually have any validity or credence backing it up. So just recognize kind of where is your knowledge coming from as well. So other things that you can do, of course, right, is recognize what are your main triggers, what's going on. If a trigger is a call where you know a kid is involved, if a trigger is based on a certain event that is something you know that's traumatic, like prepare yourself, know what's going on, set up strategies about how you're going to navigate through these if these things are going to be kind of in those environments or during those calls. Recognize changes on a personal level, but also with your friends or with the family, right? So if one of your colleagues, you notice those changes, that's where the Oscar comes back in. Have the conversation. You can use the same Oscar approach, of course, with the family, with the spouse or with the child, but look for those changes. The most important thing to me that we can do, the best thing we can do is simply ask, what can I do? Is there anything I can do to help? And it's because I don't want you to assume you have all the answers. We don't know what everybody needs. We don't know what other people require, what other people are looking for. So if I think, oh, all you need to do is go for a hike in nature, well, that might be what I need. But someone else might be allergic to nature, right? Which I am. So to me, if I'm going out into nature, I have to make sure I got a bunch of my allergy medicine available, simply because going into nature, I love it, but I might not breathe for a day or two, depending on where I'm at and kind of what I'm exposed to, of course, right? Like, so you just got to think that bigger picture, know what is kind of good for you, but know that it doesn't generalize to everyone. So ask them, what do you need? What can I do for you? How can I assist? How can I help? Is there anything I can do to kind of support you through these things, right? And if they say, just give me some space, give me some time, if that's what they want, then give it to them. That's what they're looking for. Now, if you are concerned, if you are worried, if you do fear danger of being hurt yourself or others or anything like that, call 911, right? Like, reach out to the resources that are available, because that's why they are there. Again, don't feel like you have to do it on your own. So on a personal level, make sure you have supported, trusted people in your life. You have time for your own personal self-care as well. So you're not just giving and giving and giving to everyone else. Because if you just constantly give and you got nothing left, again, that's where we tend to burn out, which is why it's so important to have appropriate boundaries, to be able to assert those, to know what your limits are, and to not go above and beyond. If I'm burning out, that is not effective for me to help any of my clients. I need to be aware of what I'm capable of interacting and engaging in, because if I got nothing left to give and I'm talking with a client and I'm falling asleep in the appointment, I can't think, I can't focus, I can't concentrate, this is not effective for me or anyone else. And don'ts. So of course, don't force people to talk. Don't tell them you have to tell me what's going on. You need to do this, that, or the other thing, because that doesn't actually support or help people through it. We want to let them know, again, the caring, the compassionate, the genuine, is there anything I can do? How can I help, right? So just be aware, pressure does not help people through these moments when they're in a position where there's stress or trauma, right? Don't tell them that they need to stop talking about it either, right? So if this is where, to me, a big part of it is, what does somebody get out of what you're doing? If I'm talking about something and it's helping me move forward, then I want to keep talking about it. But if I talk about something and it's making me ruminate, brood, dwell on it, then that's negatively impacting me. Now, telling people to stop doing it is not always great, because they may feel like they need to get it out of their system or out, whatever it might be. But you can ask them about that impact. Like, when you talk about it, does this help you to feel better? If it does, then I'm happy to help. But if it doesn't, maybe we got to find a better way to deal with some of these traumas, right? So not saying don't do it, but providing alternatives, right? Don't trivialize what's going on. So again, minimize or deny. It's not that big a deal. Just kind of let it go, move on, put it behind you, things like this. Because again, it creates a bigger gap with your spouses or with your coworkers or people. Like we don't know what their backstory is. Do you know what their upbringing? Do you know what their youth was like? Do you know if there's substance use or addictions? Do you know if there's actually problems with depressions or anxiety or other mental health issues that are at stake, right? Do you know how many other stresses were in their life that are going on? So that one event that resulted in that trauma results in PTSD. Again, maybe it was the tip of the iceberg, right? The straw that broke the camel's back. You just don't know. So we don't want to trivialize it. We don't know the backstories because the backstory, it's a spider web worth of complexities that we're not always privy to, right? So we just want to use that guidance support. How can I help rather than saying just move on, let it go. It's not that big a deal, right? Don't pick on weakness or tell people that they're weak because they can't. Like the number of clients I've had, especially in first responding roles, where that's the mindset where people are told repeatedly, like you're weak. If you can't get over this, then you must be weak. That's not the case, right? I mean, to me, those that don't realize that reaching out is actually a strength, right? It gets you back on track to help people quicker. But when you do nothing, you break down. To me, that's where the weakness comes into play. So we want to make sure that we reinforce those positives, that we can actually help people to reach out. Again, break the stigma. So don't give advice. Don't tell people what to do, how to move forward, because again, it's different for every single person. Don't take things personal. So if someone does snap at you, again, realize the backstory, whatever's going on in their life. There could be numerous reasons why that's happening. And you just happen to be the person in that moment that it's being taken out of. And then if there are negative feelings, again, don't beat yourself up over it. Like again, we want to normalize. It doesn't say that it's something I want you to persist or replicate or accept that, hey, this is okay, but don't beat yourself up. I want you to learn, I want you to improve, and I want you to find a way to navigate through those negative feelings so you can improve those relationships. Right? So supporting yourself, supporting others, like resilience is there. Simplest thing with others is just asking, how can I help? How can I assist? Providing tools, skills, resources for others is simple, right? Because the goal is growth. You cannot prevent the traumatic events that you experience in your job. The traumas are going to be there. Like I said, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it is, they're part and parcel of the job that you guys are in as first responders and firefighting positions, right? But if we can grow from it, if we can improve from it, and not just the simple, what doesn't kill us, make us stronger, but it's when things happen, like how can I build? How can I improve? So I failed in this, that, or the other thing. What can I take away from it? Can I go and review what happened? How can I build upon those things that create that growth, right? That's what post-traumatic growth is. The trauma is not prevented, but I'm building greater strengths, greater resiliencies, understanding, greater commitment to life, savoring more positive moments, finding more gratitude to the things that are going on day to day, right? Like all of these things I can take away as part of that post-traumatic growth, right? And that's what we want to reframe that mindset with. A common treatment modality is called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, reframing the way that you think and reframing the way that you look at the world, right? And your actions that you engage in, which is kind of where that self-care comes into play. It's one of the more effective cognitive or behavioral approaches, the cognitive behavioral approach in counseling. One of the most popular out there as well when dealing with trauma, because you're processing the negative thinking and finding positive actions and way to engage in life in those moments to move forward, right? And that to me is essentially what PTG, the post-traumatic growth, is about. Reframing the negative thoughts and finding positive ways to engage in your life. Because it's not about undoing the traumas. It's not about, like I said, never having these things be there. Once a trauma happens, there will be cracks in your armor. There will be challenges that present. But the goal is to rebuild. The goal is to repair. And this is where you can find beauty, you can find strength, you can find brand new ways to look at what's occurred, right? And that's where finding kind of different ways to view traumas comes into play. So kintsugi, you can see here, repairing with gold and understanding that a piece is more beautiful for having been broken. So the kind of depiction, on the left here, you can see just a little bowl that was shattered that was molded back together, right? And the bowl itself might be seen as simple and basic, just a simple black bowl, But once it's been broken and then repaired with something that is desirable, something positive, it has a brand new appeal to it, right? And that's kind of what we want to do when we look at trauma. There's an old kind of analogy I remember. So it was I think it was Chinese calligraphy. It was the word trauma again as an example. So trauma was, I think it was the word trauma. I might be getting it wrong, but anyway, it's a word similar to trauma that was as written in the Chinese characters. It was written in combined two different words, danger and opportunity, right? So a traumatic experience, a traumatic event in life can be perceived as two things. It can be a very dangerous period in time and kind of what path leads us down, or it can be an opportunity again for growth, for rebuilding, for strength, things like this. That to me is what this kintsugi is about. That's what kind of post-traumatic growth is about. That's what repairing and building up and kind of getting back on track is about. It's about finding the opportunities of how do we move forward, not by undoing the issues, undoing the cracks. The cracks, like I said, they'll be with us for life. But it's like a scar. It's a memory, and we can take those with us and have them grow rather than have them consumed. Okay. And then, of course, lastly, I'm going to just pick on just general basic self-care, of course, right? So make sure that you take care of yourself. Your work can be extremely overwhelming in what you do, not just in the firefighter position, but again, having the family, having the jobs outside of all this stuff, and all of it coming together can be very overwhelming. So you need to make sure that you find the positives, find things that you're grateful for. The kids, find things that you can savor, engage in the present in those little moments. Find positive activities. Do you like woodwork? Do you like movies? Do you like reading? Do you like going for hikes and walks, bike rides, walking the dog, right? Time with the kids, playing board games, like whatever it is. Find things that you enjoy and make sure that you engage in. Sometimes you're again going to get called away, but it doesn't mean you can't set time up afterwards to still commit to those things to recharge those batteries, right? So if you're feeling stressed, set boundaries and reach out, right? Set the boundaries of what are you capable of doing. If your battery's drained, maybe you need to take a break from something, but don't take a break from the self-care. The self-care to me is always relevant. That's like taking a break from breathing, right? Not breathing does not make your life better. You might think, oh, but I can get more done if I don't take care of myself, when actually it's the opposite. You can get less done when you don't take care of yourself. So make sure your self-care is your priority. And then, if necessary, reach out for help. Talk to a counselor, to your doctors, to physicians, to other supports, whatever it is that you need. Exercise, of course, exercise, nutrition, sleep being the three most common self-care activities that I encourage everyone to engage in and set as priority when able. But when we struggle, when we can't find the way forward through simple self-care, that's when I suggest reach out to the EFAPs or suggest to others if they're the ones struggling to reach out to their EFAP, employee family assistance programs, to counselors, to their psychologists, to the doctors. Like, accept the helping hands that are available because there are a lot. Okay? So I hope I've given you something to think about here today. So again, just first responders, your jobs, they are stressful, right? There's a lot of stigma for asking for help, but doing it is going to allow you to last and persist and save your life, your relationships, friends, and family a lot of agony in the long run, right? So recognize, what is your job? What is the role? What is it that you're doing? And what are the impacts it's having in your life? If right now you're on top of it and things are going well, reflect on what are you doing well? And how do you make sure you replicate that if things do go sideways? And if you're not doing well, then what do I got to do to get back on track? And that's where the resiliency comes into play. Reaching out, friends, family, other individuals, knowing the programs that are there, but act on it. Take the initiative and do something about it, because you're not by yourself in this. There's a ton of individuals in those same roles. Sometimes all you have to do is speak up, and then others will come to you and say, yeah, you know what? Me too. I'm in that position. And right there, you started that support and that healing process. It can be that simple sometimes. Okay. So if you have a hard time, again, just reach out to the resources. Thank you for listening to me. Some of the resources available, again, some of the websites, the wellnesstogether.ca and your EFAP, the 1-800 number, as well as the website that you can reach out to. There are loads of resources, so take advantage of it. All right. So I hope I've given you something to think about in this workshop and in any of the other workshops that you kind of listen to. But as always, if you're looking for more information, reach out to it. Educate yourself. Take care of yourself. All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care.